Gavin King could silence stock markets with a single tweet, but he couldn't get his baby girl to stop echoing the plane's ding. First-class seat 2A. Leather armrests. Noise-canceling headphones. $1 million deal draft glowing on his tablet. But none of it mattered, not when his 9-month-old daughter, Patsy King, was lighting up every time the airplane's PA system chimed. Ding! Ding! She replied, beaming. Again. And again. At first, passengers smiled. By the 10th round, the mood had changed. Phones were out. Eyebrows raised. A businessman 2 seats over muttered, "This is why kids don't belong in first class." Gavin tried everything. Bottles. White noise. A smart plush designed by his own startup that played calming frequencies. No luck. Patsy wasn't crying. She was obsessed, hooked, and Gavin, CEO of one of the fastest-growing sound tech firms in the world, had no solution. Then came the voice. "Sir, may I try something?" Gavin looked up, startled. A teenage boy stood just past the first-class curtain. He couldn't have been older than 15. Worn purple shirt, faded jeans, a duct-taped backpack slung over one shoulder. But he didn't flinch under the pressure of the glares. His voice was calm, his hands open. Gavin, exhausted and out of options, gave a nod. The boy stepped forward. He didn't speak again, just gently tapped the armrest. Tap, tap, tap. Then he hummed, a soft tone that curled around the chime's frequency like a wave folding over a ripple. Patsy froze. Ding. No ding. Instead, she tilted her head, watched, yawned, and went still. For the first time in what felt like forever, the cabin was quiet. Gavin stared. Speechless. "How did you—" The boy gave a slight smile. "She was just syncing with the PA frequency. I gave her a new one to follow." Gavin was floored. "Who are you?" "Edward Robison. I'm 15, from Atlanta. I'm headed to London for a Youth Innovation Expo." Gavin's eyes drifted to the patched backpack, where wires poked out of a clear, homemade case. He had no idea that inside that backpack was a device that would soon transform his entire company's future, and that this boy, from a place Gavin had never once thought about, was about to teach him what it really meant to hear. Gavin King had built his empire by predicting sound, selling serenity in a world full of noise. But nothing prepared him for the frequency shift that had just walked up from economy class. This flight wasn't just taking him to London. It was taking him somewhere deeper. Before we begin this story, like and subscribe. Comment where you are watching from, because your supports helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get into the story. Gavin watched in stunned silence as the boy knelt beside his seat like he belonged there. Patsy, cradled in Gavin's arms, blinked at the newcomer. Her chubby fingers twitched toward him, curious but not startled. For the first time in hours, she wasn't mimicking the sound that had turned a luxury cabin into a pressure cooker. The boy gently took the plastic rattle Gavin had dropped earlier, turned it in his hands, and gave it a soft shake. It produced a muted jingle, just enough to catch Patsy's attention. "She's not misbehaving," the boy said quietly, almost to himself. "She's just locked into the frequency." Gavin leaned forward. "Locked in?" The boy nodded. "Her brain hears the chime and mirrors it, over and over. Same pitch, same tempo. She's too young to filter it out on her own." His voice was calm, measured, not cocky, just certain. He tapped the armrest. Tap, tap, tap. a gentle rhythm in a 3-beat pattern. Then he hummed, low and deliberate, a sound that wrapped around the memory of the PA chime like a blanket smothering a spark. Patsy tilted her head, eyes wide. Another chime rang out from the speakers. Ding! But this time, no echo from her. The silence hit like a thunderclap. Gavin held his breath. So did everyone else. He hadn't noticed how tense the cabin had grown until the pressure lifted. Even the flight attendant standing by the galley slowly unclenched her hands. The boy kept humming, lowering the tone just slightly with each breath. Patsy's eyelids fluttered. Her hands relaxed. And then, like magic, she yawned. Her tiny head dropped against Gavin's chest. Silence. Real, sacred silence. Gavin stared at the boy like he'd just watched someone defuse a bomb. "How did you?" he whispered, afraid a louder voice might break the spell. The boy gave a slight shrug. "Sound has patterns, sir. You just have to find the calm one." Around them, passengers began to stir. A few offered soft applause. Someone whispered, "What the hell just happened?" The man across the aisle who'd been muttering earlier now looked embarrassed. The influencer lowered her phone. The flight attendant stepped forward. "That was incredible," she said to the boy. "Do you work with kids?" He shook his head. "Just my little brother. He has sensory issues." Then, as if remembering something, he stood. "I should head back. Didn't mean to cause a scene." "Wait," Gavin said. The boy froze, halfway turned toward the aisle. "Sit," Gavin said, gesturing to the empty seat beside him. "Please." There was a moment of hesitation, pride, uncertainty, but then he nodded and sat. Gavin shifted Patsy carefully to the seat between them, where she remained asleep, her tiny breaths even and soft. "I'm Gavin King," he said, still trying to process everything. "And you are?" "Edward Robison, but people call me Robison." Gavin studied him up close now. The boy's t-shirt was clean but faded. His jeans were patched at the knees. His shoes looked half a size too small, but his posture was straight, his gaze unshaken. "You're traveling alone?" Robison nodded. "Headed to London. Youth Innovation Expo. I'm competing in the acoustic engineering category." "Wait," Gavin said. "How old are you?" 15? That took Gavin a second. "And what exactly did you just do to my daughter?" "I redirected her auditory focus," Robison said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "She latched onto a single frequency, and I gave her a gentler one to match. Babies want to echo. They just don't know when to stop." Gavin blinked. "That's not something most 15-year-olds know." Robison reached down and unslung his backpack. It was duct-taped on the sides, the zipper held together by a safety pin. From inside, he pulled out a spiral notebook, its cover covered in tiny scribbles and formulas. Tucked behind it was a small homemade device. Wires, knobs, a metal box no bigger than a soda can. "This is my prototype," he said. "It listens to chaotic environments and creates a harmonic balance response. I made it to help kids who melt down in noisy spaces." Gavin recognized the concept instantly. It was a raw version of something his own engineers had pitched last quarter. Except this one looked better. Simpler. Smarter. "You built this yourself?" Gavin asked, incredulous. Robison nodded. "Library computers. Spare parts. My church helped me get the flight ticket." Gavin was quiet for a long moment. Patsy stirred slightly, then nestled deeper into sleep. "Robison," he said softly, "I think we need to talk more when we land." The boy smiled, a mix of pride and caution. "Sure," he said, "as long as you don't mind listening." For the first time in hours, Gavin King laughed, not the polite corporate chuckle, the real kind. The kind that sounded like the beginning of something. Before the jets, the boardrooms, the biometric smartwatches, and the Forbes covers, Gavin King was just a kid from Cleveland with a second-hand laptop and a noise problem. He used to sleep with headphones on, not for music, but to drown out the street arguments, sirens, and the thumping bass from the apartment above. That's where his obsession with control began, not with ambition, but with silence. By the time he was 17, Gavin had built his first sound filter from scavenged radio parts and a cracked Raspberry Pi. By 22, he'd sold an algorithm that helped reduce factory noise pollution by 32%. By 35, he was a billionaire and CEO of King Sound Technologies, a firm specializing in acoustic AI systems used in everything from classrooms to defense contracts. He built his empire with surgical precision. Disrupt, dominate, deliver. That was the King Sound motto, and Gavin lived it. Everything in his life followed that rhythm. His mornings started at 4:45 a.m. sharp. His wardrobe was grayscale. His schedule was bulletproof. Interviews, investor decks, M&A calls, keynotes, timed to the second. His name was synonymous with innovation, discipline, and hyper-efficiency. Except when it came to Patsy. Parenthood was the one system he couldn't automate. He'd tried. Sleep trainers, predictive feeding apps, a crib that responded to micro-whimpers. But nothing, not even his own engineers, could produce something that quieted her as fast as his daughter could unmake a plan. Gavin's wife, Clara, had once been his tether to something softer. She was a scientist, not a startup addict, and she had patience where he had blueprints. But 3 years into Patsy's life, Clara had said, "You're married to control, not to me," and walked out without a public statement, NDAs, or fanfare. Gavin didn't fight her. He didn't have the language for grief that didn't come with a press release. Now, it was just him and Patsy. She was the only thing that couldn't be forecasted, outsourced, or optimized. She drooled on his pitch decks. She screamed through board meetings held over Zoom. She loved toy xylophones, off-key ones. She laughed at nothing, especially when he tried to be serious. And when she looked up at him, wide-eyed and innocent, he felt like a fraud in his own empire. And yet, she was the only one who could make him feel human again. But it wasn't until that flight, until the moment a kid from economy class silenced her with a simple hum, that Gavin realized just how deep he'd gone into his need for control. Watching Edward Robinson guide Patsy into calm, Gavin had felt something crack, like a string pulled too tight for too long. This wasn't just parenting. It wasn't science. It wasn't tech. It was presence. And Gavin had none of it. He'd been trying to fix his daughter like she was a faulty system, throwing tools at her, running updates, debugging emotion. But Robinson hadn't used tools. He hadn't even used words. He had listened, really listened. That moment rattled Gavin more than any hostile takeover or VC betrayal ever had. Now, with Patsy asleep between them and Robinson quietly flipping through a notebook filled with hand-drawn circuits, Gavin found himself staring out the window, 30,000 feet above, a life he no longer recognized. He thought about the last time he'd held Patsy without a meeting reminder pinging in his ear. He couldn't remember. He thought about how many times he'd told himself he was doing this all for her. Maybe that had been true once. Now? He wasn't so sure. The boy beside him, Edward, was focused but at ease. His posture casual, his eyes alert. Not intimidated by wealth or reputation, not even interested in it. Just present. Gavin glanced back down at Patsy. Her tiny fist rested on her chest. Her breathing was soft, steady, a gentle rhythm, like the hum that had soothed her. For the first time in years, Gavin didn't feel in control. And for the first time in his life, he didn't want to be her. Maybe this was what Clara meant when she said he didn't know how to just be. He turned back to Robinson. "So," Gavin said, voice quieter now, "how did you learn all this?" Robinson looked up. "Trial and error," he said with a shrug. "I couldn't afford anything fancy. I had to figure out what made my brother stop crying, what made my mom stop shaking after night shifts." Gavin nodded slowly. He wasn't just hearing the words. He was actually listening. And in that moment, he realized something. The kid from economy class had more command of sound and humanity than most of Gavin's executive team. And for once, Gavin didn't feel threatened by that. He felt grateful. Before the first-class cabin, before the duct-taped backpack, before he knew what a resonance curve was, Edward Robinson just wanted his little brother to sleep through the night. Home was a cramped two-bedroom above a laundromat in Atlanta's West End. The washing machines downstairs rumbled through the floorboards like distant thunder, and the street outside never really quieted. Car horns, police sirens, bass from passing cars. Always something buzzing or barking or banging. But inside that tiny apartment, Robinson learned how to listen. Really listen. His mother, Tina, was a nurse's aide. She worked nights and slept in short bursts. His siblings, Aaron and Jada, were 4 and 6, full of questions and energy and loud joy. But Aaron, the youngest, had autism. Noise overwhelmed him. Sudden sounds made him cry, cover his ears, rock in place. There were nights when nothing helped. Not lullabies, not weighted blankets. His mom tried everything, until one night she sank to the floor and whispered, "I just want 5 minutes of peace." That's when Robinson started building. He scavenged broken speakers from a dumpster behind a strip mall, fished wire out of old radios, learned how to solder by watching videos on a borrowed library laptop. He spent weeks studying sound waves, acoustics, and something called resonance stabilization, how one frequency could counterbalance another. His first prototype looked like junk, a shoebox lined with tin foil and solder points connected to a Bluetooth speaker cracked in half. But when he turned it on and played a low, steady hum across the apartment, Aaron calmed. It didn't fix everything, but it gave them 5 minutes, then 10, then a full hour where his brother could sleep. His mother cried the first time it worked. "You're gonna do something big, Eddie," she said, hugging him tight. "You just have to make the world hear you." That line stayed with him. It echoed every time he got teased at school. "Yo, science guy!" they'd shout. Or worse, "Where's your spaceship, Nerdison?" He didn't care. Not really. Because when he turned that box on and saw his brother's face relax, when the apartment filled with something soft and warm and safe, he felt powerful. At 15, Robinson didn't have an engineering degree or a portfolio, but he had purpose. When his school counselor mentioned the Youth Innovation Expo in London, his eyes lit up. A place where young inventors from all over the world presented tech that solved real problems. He was in, but the registration fee alone was more than his family had in their bank account. It was his church that stepped up first. Then the community center, his mom's co-workers. Even a few neighborhood teens who used to clown on him donated. Yard sales, bake sales, a GoFundMe page that barely hit the minimum. When he finally bought the ticket, he couldn't afford the baggage fee for his invention. He almost missed the flight arguing at the gate. It took a manager's pity and a prayer. But now? Now he sat in seat 2B, beside a billionaire. Across from him, Gavin King was staring out the window, deep in thought. And to Robison's left, little Patsy King slept in her first-class bassinet, like she'd always belonged there. Robison felt out of place, but not ashamed. He looked down at his hands, still stained faintly with solder, at his backpack, patched together with hope and duct tape, at his notebook, where the pages were filled with equations and sketches most adults couldn't decode. He belonged here, even if no one had sent him an invitation. The man beside him, the Gavin King, hadn't asked about his grades or test scores. He hadn't demanded a pitch deck. He'd just watched his daughter calm in Robison's hands and asked, "Who are you?" That meant something. Robison glanced out the window. He thought about his mother waking up in an empty apartment, wondering if he made it. He thought about Aaron clutching the plastic replica of the Harmony box, proud of his big brother. He thought about the moment he'd nearly been turned away at the gate, his invention too heavy for his budget. And he thought about how, even now, he wasn't carrying luggage. Just a box full of potential. Just a notebook full of frequencies. Just a quiet belief that sound could heal, if the world would just stop long enough to listen. He turned to Gavin, who still hadn't spoken. "You okay?" Gavin blinked and looked over. "Honestly," he said, smiling faintly, "I think this is the first moment I've really been quiet in years." Robison nodded. Then he said the words his mother used to say when he worked late into the night. Soldering hope, together, one wire at a time. "Well," he said, "you just have to make the world hear you." The cabin lights had dimmed. The murmur of conversation faded behind the soft drone of engines. First class had settled into its high-altitude quiet. But Gavin King had never felt more awake. He glanced at Robison, who was flipping through a notebook crammed with circuit diagrams and waveform sketches. The boy's eyes scanned like a trained engineer's, but his fingers fidgeted like he was still deciding if he belonged here. "So," Gavin said finally, breaking the silence, "tell me about that box of yours." Robison looked up, not startled, just curious. "The Harmony box? That's what you call it?" "Yeah," he nodded. "It stabilizes resonance, brings things back into balance." Gavin raised a brow. "And how does it actually work?" Robison smiled, like he'd been waiting for that question all his life. "It listens first," he said. "It maps the dominant frequencies in an environment, usually chaotic ones, overlapping voices, traffic, alarms, crying. Then it emits a low harmonic that gently interferes. Not noise-canceling exactly, more like emotional tuning, a way to guide the space back into calm." Gavin leaned back, processing. "So it doesn't block sound. It balances it." Robison nodded. "Exactly. Canceling noise is like yelling, 'Be quiet,' into a room. This just whispers a different rhythm until the noise settles on its own." Gavin let out a slow breath, impressed. "You built that at 15? Robison shrugged. "Had to. My little brother couldn't sleep otherwise." Gavin tried to keep his expression neutral, but his mind was already racing. Resonance stabilization. The concept had been floating around his R&D division for over a year, mostly theory, expensive prototypes that couldn't scale. And here was this kid, talking about it like he was discussing music. He folded his arms to mask the twitch of excitement. "Have you presented this to any companies?" "No," Robinson said plainly. "Too risky. They'd just take it, rebrand it, and forget where it came from." Smart kid. Too smart, in fact. Gavin shifted in his seat. "You don't trust corporations?" Robinson gave a half-smile. "I trust sound more than people." That landed heavier than expected. Gavin exhaled through his nose and stared down at Patsy, still asleep between them. "You're not wrong," he muttered. Robinson studied him for a moment, then said, "You're thinking about how to sell it already." Gavin's head tapped up, caught. "I saw the look," Robinson said. "You're trying not to look too interested, but you're already calculating patents and market fit." Gavin blinked, then laughed, softly. "Guilty." "I get it," Robinson said, not unkindly. "But sometimes people don't listen. They just wait to respond." Gavin sat still. That one hit deeper than it should have. He looked at the boy, not as a tech prospect, not as a market disruptor, but as a mirror. And for the first time, he didn't see a kid from economy. He saw someone who understood something fundamental Gavin had missed for years. Sound wasn't just data, it was emotion. "So tell me," Gavin said after a beat, "where did that come from? The idea that sound can guide people emotionally?" Robinson looked out the window. "When my mom came home after night shifts, she was always shaking. Not just tired, like bone-deep stress. I used to play this loop I made with a low pulse and a soft hum, and I'd sit beside her. She wouldn't even talk. Just listen." He paused, then added, "She told me once, 'Eddie, you're not just smart. You're kind with your ears.'" That stuck. Gavin nodded slowly, something unspooling in his chest. "You ever get scared?" he asked. "All the time," Robinson replied. "I'm scared I'll fail. Scared I'll make my brother worse. Scared someone's going to steal my work. And I'll just be a footnote in someone else's story." Gavin stared out the window. "Yeah," he said. "I know that fear." Robinson looked surprised. "You?" "I built my whole company to control the world around me," Gavin said quietly, "because deep down I'm terrified I can't control myself." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was real. It hummed between them, not unlike the resonance Robinson described, not cancellation, but balance. Then, as if summoned by the quiet, Patsy stirred. She blinked up at the cabin lights, yawned, and saw Robinson. Her entire face lit up. She giggled and reached for his cheek with a chubby hand, eyes dancing. Robinson laughed softly. "Hey, you." Gavin watched, stunned by the ease of it. His daughter, who had screamed half the flight, was now laughing like she'd just found her favorite toy in the world. Patsy's fingers patted Robinson's jaw. Her giggles were bright and breathy, like music, and in that moment, Gavin didn't see a pitch deck or a prototype. He saw connection, human, unfiltered, harmonized. "Looks like you've got a fan," Gavin said. Robinson smiled. "She's got a good ear." Gavin reached over and ruffled his daughter's curls, his other hand brushing Robinson's shoulder in a silent gesture of respect. The box was impressive. But this? This was the real invention. The wheels touched down with a soft jolt, and the cabin filled with the usual chorus of beeps, clicks, and shuffled belongings. Gavin King sat back, eyes heavy, heart strangely light. Patsy was awake now, calm, curious, watching the cabin with big eyes as if nothing had ever gone wrong. Edward Robeson sat beside her, gently packing up his notebook and the battered harmony box with care. It had been the most unusual flight of Gavin's life, and easily the most meaningful. As passengers began to disembark, Gavin pulled out his phone and tapped in a few commands. A black car would be waiting for him and Patsy at the private terminal exit. He turned to Robeson. "Where are you staying?" "Budget hostel in Bethnal Green," Robeson replied. "Shared room. Cheap, but close to the expo center." Gavin frowned. "You're not traveling with anyone?" Robeson shook his head. "Nah, it's just me." There was a long pause. "You eaten?" Gavin asked. Robeson hesitated. "Not since yesterday. Had to skip the meal on the flight to keep the device safe." He patted his backpack. "Didn't want to leave it." Gavin glanced down at Patsy, then back at the boy. "Come have dinner. My hotel has a restaurant. It's quiet. Nobody will bug you." Robeson shifted, visibly uncomfortable. I don't think I can walk into a place like that. People'll stare." "They might," Gavin said. "But I don't care. And you shouldn't either." For a beat, Robeson looked like he was going to refuse again. Then Patsy let out a small coo and reached for him. That settled it. The dining room at the Langham London was velvet and glass. High ceilings, soft piano, staff trained to whisper. Robeson sat stiffly across from Gavin, his elbows off the table, his patched backpack placed neatly on the floor beside him like it needed its own seat. They ordered. Gavin asked for steak. Robeson chose grilled chicken, scanning the menu like it was a foreign document. Once the waiter left, Gavin leaned forward. "You said you're self-taught?" Robeson nodded. "Yeah, my school has computers, but the internet's locked down. I use the public library after hours. They give me 2 hours a day on the desktops. I print stuff, study it at home, then come back and do simulations." "Alone?" "Mostly. My mom helps when she can, but she's working nights. I taught myself circuits from old repair manuals and audiobooks. YouTube, when I could get Wi-Fi." Gavin stirred his drink, trying not to show the surge of disbelief. "You ever file a patent?" he asked. Robeson gave a dry laugh. "Can't afford that. Plus, I wasn't sure if it was good enough yet. Still testing." Gavin sat back. This boy had built something investors would kill to get their hands on. And he was flying blind. No IP protection. No corporate shield. Just hope and instinct. "You know," Gavin said slowly, "you're walking into a room full of predators tomorrow." Robeson's smile faded. "Yeah, I figured." "You're vulnerable," Gavin added. "You have no patent, no legal defense. One wrong conversation, and they could repackage your entire design by the end of the week." "I know." The boy didn't flinch. No panic, just acceptance. Gavin exhaled. "Let me come to the expo with you. I'll register as a guest sponsor." Robeson stared at him. "Sponsor? I won't pitch anything. Won't talk to the press. I'll just be there, to support. Quietly." Robeson was silent for a moment. Then he said something that stopped Gavin cold. "You can come," he said, voice even. "But the sound has to come from me." Gavin blinked. "What?" "My work, my idea, my story," Robeson said. "You can stand in the room, but you don't get to shape the frequency. I've worked too hard to have someone else speak for me." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, Gavin felt something unusual. Respect. And boundaries. No one said no to him. Not really. Not like this, but Robinson had, without fear, without attitude, just truth. Gavin nodded slowly. Fair enough, he said. You've got my word. Their food arrived. Robinson dug in carefully at first, then with growing confidence. The restaurant was filled with soft conversations and muted clinks. But at their table, no one spoke for a while. There was no need. The boy had set the tone, and Gavin was finally learning to listen. The London International Youth Innovation Expo looked more like a tech startup launch than a student fair. Spotlights sliced through the glass ceiling of the exhibition arena. Digital banners scrolled above dozens of booths, displaying words like neuro-responsive robotics, eco-hydraulic AI, and quantum mesh learning. Bright-eyed teens in tailored uniforms showcased gadgets so advanced they could pass for military prototypes. Edward Robinson stood at booth 47B, tucked into the far corner of the hall. His banner was made from printer paper taped across a folding display board. His tech was a single compact box, slightly dented, wires visible, zip ties holding its frame together. And still, people gathered, not because of how it looked, but because of how it sounded. At Robinson's booth, there was no pitch deck, no animation reel, no laser pointers, just a boy with a voice like a low hum and a device that listened before it spoke. As the crowd leaned in, Robinson activated the harmony box. The floor around them buzzed with the ambient chaos of a packed arena. Murmurs, clapping, startup noise from surrounding booths. He tapped the device. A soft tone vibrated outward, barely audible, like breath under a door. Within seconds, people began to shift closer, unconsciously lowering their voices. One of the judges, a Swedish tech CEO, narrowed her eyes, then smiled. "The sound feels softer," she murmured to her colleague. Robinson nodded. "It's not canceling anything. It's just giving the room a different rhythm to follow." Other booths dazzled with drones and augmented reality. But Robinson's was the only one that felt alive. Human. Calming. A few visitors closed their eyes, standing still just to feel the balance. One reporter jotted a note. "Tech that listens first." Across the arena, Gavin King stood near the espresso cart in a dark tailored coat, trying to stay out of the spotlight. It wasn't working. A small cluster of media reps spotted him. One approached with a microphone. "Mr. King, what brings you to a student showcase? Investment scouting?" Gavin smiled politely. "No, I'm here to listen." "Listen?" the reporter echoed. He nodded once. "It's more important than talking." Then he walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Back at booth 47B, Robinson continued answering questions, calm but precise. He explained how the harmony box tracked real-time frequencies and emitted counter-harmonics to guide emotional equilibrium. It works best in classrooms, hospitals, places where stress is baked into the environment. A judge leaned in. "Did you build this alone?" Robinson nodded. "With what kind of equipment?" He hesitated, then said honestly, "Public library computers, recycled parts. A soldering kit I borrowed from a neighbor." The judge blinked. "You built emotional resonance technology with scrap?" Robinson shrugged. "Yeah, had to." The judge scribbled something down, twice. Just before final judging, a large crowd was ushered into the central demonstration area. Stage lights flared, microphones buzzed. The MC stepped forward, voice booming through the PA. "As we conclude this year's expo, we invite our finalists to present their innovations. One last time." Robinson stood backstage, clutching the harmony box. He could hear the crowd shifting, the hum of anticipation. Then, screech. A high-pitched whine split the room as the main speaker system glitched, blasting feedback across the auditorium. People flinched. Some covered their ears. A baby in the front row burst into tears. The MC froze. Techs scrambled toward the sound booth, and Robison moved. He stepped onto the stage, unnoticed at first. He knelt near the nearest floor speaker, placed the harmony box beside it, and flipped the switch. A deep, warm tone pulsed outward. It didn't block the feedback. It met it, matched its rhythm, softened its edges. The crowd quieted. The feedback began to bend, losing its sharpness. Another pulse, gentler. Then another. The piercing whine faded into nothing. Silence fell. Then applause. Loud, rising, sustained applause. People stood. A few judges were on their feet. Gavin watched from the edge of the crowd, one hand over his mouth. Robison stood slowly, blinking under the lights. The MC, flustered but impressed, stepped back up to the mic. "Well, I think that was the most poetic rescue we've ever had." More laughter, more clapping. But Gavin didn't laugh. He just looked at the boy on stage and thought, he didn't just present his invention, he used it. And in doing so, he proved exactly what it's for. Not to cancel noise. To restore harmony. They called his name last. The room exploded in applause as Edward Robison stepped back onto the main stage, the Grand Innovator Award glinting in his hand. Cameras flashed. Judges stood. Somewhere in the crowd, someone whistled. The MC called him the boy who literally restored harmony. Robison blinked under the lights, overwhelmed but grounded. He didn't cry. He didn't pose. He just gave a small nod, as if to say, "Thank you for finally hearing me." Backstage was quieter. The lights dimmed. The crowd thinned. He stood off to the side, hugging his patched backpack, the harmony box tucked safely inside. The metal around his neck felt heavy, like a symbol and a burden all at once. Then a familiar voice spoke. "I told you she had good taste." He turned. Gavin King stood there, one hand in his coat pocket, the other holding a small velvet box. His smile was tired, proud, quiet. Robison gave a breathy laugh. "You stayed?" "I said I'd be here," Gavin replied. "I don't make promises I can't keep." Robison looked down at the medal again. "They gave me a full ride, MIT, all expenses paid." Gavin's smile widened. "That's just the beginning." There was a pause. Then something shifted in Gavin's eyes. A deeper seriousness. He stepped forward and held out the velvet box. "This isn't an award," he said. "It's an offer." Robison opened it. Inside was a single silver pin engraved with 2 initials, KR. "King Robison Acoustic Initiative," Gavin said. "It's yours, 50-50. Robison stared. 50? "Equal ownership. You bring the tech. I bring the reach. We build it together. From scratch. No suits, no pressure, no corner office nonsense." Robison's face was unreadable. "So you're not buying it?" "No," Gavin said. "I'm building it with you." There was a long silence. Then Robison spoke, slowly, carefully. "Wait," Gavin's voice dropped. "Because I've spent my whole life controlling sound. But I never understood it until I met you. I built an empire with people who hear noise. You hear meaning." Robison looked down, unsure. "I don't want to get absorbed," he said finally. I don't want to be a headline or a feel-good story. I've seen what happens when people like me trust people like you." Gavin nodded. "You should be cautious. You're right to be. That's why this is a partnership, not charity. I don't want a scholarship to come with strings." "There are no strings," Gavin said. "Just trust and room to breathe." Robison studied him. He'd seen men like Gavin on magazine covers, at press conferences, in viral clips, slicing through markets with cool precision. But here, backstage, unpolished, holding a tiny velvet box, this man looked different. Human. "You really listened," Robison said softly. Gavin blinked. "You didn't just hear my sound," Robison continued. "You listened." Something in those words broke through Gavin's armor. A pressure behind his chest gave way. He looked down. His eyes burned unexpectedly. He hadn't cried in years. Not at his company's IPO, not when his wife walked out, not even the day he held his daughter for the first time. But now, in this quiet, cluttered hallway behind a student stage, a 15-year-old from Atlanta had dismantled the last wall inside him. He covered his mouth for a second, collecting himself, then said, "You changed something in me, more than any investor, any deal. I want to build this with you because I believe in it, and in you." Robison nodded, voice thick but steady. "Okay." "You mean it?" "Yeah," he said. "Let's make it real." They shook hands, not the stiff kind of business meetings, but the kind that says, "We're in this now. Together." As they turned to leave, Gavin glanced back toward the now empty stage. "You know," he said, half smiling, "when I got on that flight, I thought I was traveling to London for work." "And now?" Robison asked. "Now I think I was traveling to find the right frequency." They walked out side by side. One billionaire, one boy, both changed. In Gavin's pocket, the empty velvet box felt light. In Robison's backpack, the harmony box pulsed quietly. And somewhere inside both of them, something had finally tuned to the same wavelength. 3 weeks later, the press called it the Harmony Project. What began as a shared meal between strangers on a flight had turned into an official partnership. The King Robison Acoustic Initiative, a first-of-its-kind collaboration between one of the world's most powerful tech CEOs and a 15-year-old inventor from Atlanta. The press couldn't stop talking about it. The boy who tuned the skies, from economy class to innovation royalty. The sound that changed everything. But behind the headlines, beyond the cameras and articles, something quieter had taken root. A project not driven by publicity, but by purpose. The Harmony Project focused on therapeutic sound environments for children with sensory processing issues. Schools, hospitals, and daycare centers became test sites for Robison's re-engineered Harmony Box, now developed with a full team of acoustic engineers, but still bearing his signature. It listened before it spoke. On a grey Wednesday morning in East London, Gavin King and Edward Robison toured one of the first schools to receive a prototype. The halls were painted in soft blues and greens. Sound-absorbing panels lined the ceilings. In the corner of every classroom, a small black box pulsed quietly, tuned to balance the room in real time. Gavin walked beside Robison, his daughter Patsy cradled in his arms. She was calm, her eyes wide, curious. The teachers smiled as she passed. A few waved. She waved back. "She's different now," Gavin said softly. "I mean, she's still Patsy, but there's peace in her I didn't know how to give her before." Robison nodded. She just needed someone to hear her rhythm. They stepped into the sensory classroom. A space filled with tactile walls, soft light, and peaceful colors. In the center stood a group of children playing quietly. A therapist guided one child through deep breathing exercises. Another child built towers from silent foam blocks. A speaker in the ceiling chimed, "Ding!" For a split second, every adult in the room stiffened, remembering. Gavin glanced at Patsy instinctively, bracing, but she didn't cry, didn't flail. She looked up at the speaker, tilted her head, and smiled. "Ding," she whispered, pitch perfect, grinning at no one in particular. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then laughter. Soft, relieved, joyful. Robinson chuckled. "Guess she's still got perfect pitch." Gavin laughed with him, pulling Patsy closer. "That sound used to give me heartburn." Now it felt like a full-circle melody. A teacher knelt beside Patsy and gently touched her hand. "She's the reason we got funding, isn't she?" "She's part of it," Gavin said. "But he's the reason it works." He nodded toward Robinson, who was now crouched beside a child stacking colored blocks, speaking in a soft voice, his harmony box whirring quietly behind him. Later, as they walked through the courtyard toward the exit, Gavin paused. "You know," he said, "I used to think I was supposed to teach you something." Robinson glanced over. And I realized I had it backward." He shifted Patsy in his arms as she reached toward Robinson. Her little fingers brushed his jacket sleeve. She giggled. Gavin smiled. "She likes you. She liked me before you did," Robinson said. They both laughed. At the gate, before parting, Gavin turned to face him. "What do you want this to be, Robinson? This project, I mean, beyond the headlines." Robinson didn't answer right away. He looked up at the school behind them, where glass windows reflected the overcast sky. "I want it to be the kind of sound that makes people feel seen," he said. "Like the world finally makes space for them. Quiet doesn't mean silence. It means respect." Gavin nodded slowly. "Then that's what we'll build." He held out his hand. Robinson shook it. No contract, no ceremony, just a shared understanding, the sound of real trust. As Gavin turned to leave, Patsy resting against his shoulder, she made one last sound, soft, sleepy. "Ding!" He smiled and looked back at Robinson. "Maybe she just wants to remind us," he said, "that even harmony starts with a little noise." The ding that once embarrassed one of the world's most powerful men had become the note that connected 3 lives and changed how the world would listen.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.